The sound of the suitcase wheels scraping against the floor came before I even saw her face. That sound still echoes in my ears when I think about that day. I was standing near the doorway, holding my cup of tea, when I noticed two large suitcases placed neatly beside the sofa, as if they had always belonged there. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then I looked up and saw my daughter-in-law standing quietly, her eyes avoiding mine, her hands clenched together. Without planning to say it, the words slipped out of my mouth, heavy and sharp at the same time. "Did you ask the owner of the house for permission?" I asked her, my voice calm but filled with something deeper that I couldn't explain. This house was not just bricks and walls to me. It carried years of memories, sacrifices, and silent prayers. Every corner had a story. Every room had witnessed laughter, arguments, and long nights of waiting. I had watched my son grow up here, had dreamed of his future here, and had imagined how life would change once he got married. I knew things wouldn't stay the same, but I never imagined they would reach this point. Seeing those suitcases made my heart race with questions I wasn't ready to ask, and answers I wasn't ready to hear. My daughter-in-law had been part of our family for a few years now. When my son brought her home after their wedding, she seemed polite, soft-spoken, and respectful. Like many mothers, I believed time would turn us into more than just relatives living under the same roof. I tried to give her space, tried not to interfere too much, even when things felt unfamiliar or uncomfortable. I reminded myself that every new relationship needs patience. But somewhere along the way, small misunderstandings started piling up, like dust that no one bothered to clean until it became impossible to ignore. That morning felt different from all the others. There was a strange stillness in the air. My son had left early for work without saying much, and breakfast had gone untouched on the table. When I entered the living room and saw the suitcases, my first thought was that they were going on a trip, maybe a short visit to her parents' house. But something in her posture told me this was not a simple journey. Her face looked tired, not from travel, but from carrying emotions for too long. I didn't want to sound harsh. I didn't want to turn a quiet moment into a battlefield. But the question came out anyway. "Did you ask the owner of the house for permission?" As soon as I said it, I could feel the weight of those words hanging between us. She slowly lifted her eyes to look at me, and in that brief moment, I saw fear, sadness, and a hint of defiance. It wasn't the look of someone going on vacation. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. This was never about control, at least not in my mind. It was about respect, about communication, about understanding where each person stands in a shared home. In many families, these lines are never clearly drawn, and everyone assumes the other understands. I realized then how dangerous assumptions can be. My daughter-in-law shifted her weight from one foot to the other, as if deciding whether to speak or remain silent. The suitcases stood there like silent witnesses, holding secrets I wasn't prepared to uncover yet. I thought about my son. Where was he in all this? Did he know about the suitcases? Had they discussed this together, or was this her decision alone? 1,000 questions raced through my mind, but none of them found their way to my lips. Instead, the room filled with an uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. I could feel my heart pounding, not out of anger, but out of fear of what this moment represented. Families often look perfect from the outside. People see smiles, celebrations, and photos taken on special occasions. They don't see the quiet struggles, the unspoken words, and the emotional distance that slowly grows between people living under the same roof. This house had seen its share of joy, but it had also seen tears shed in private rooms. I wondered how long my daughter-in-law had been feeling this way, and how I had missed the signs. She finally took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say something important. Her fingers tightened around the handle of one suitcase. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. That small detail broke something inside me. Was this what our family had come to? A moment where a simple question could feel like an accusation, and suitcases could feel like a threat to everything we had built? I wanted to reach out and tell her to sit down, to talk, to explain. But pride, fear, and confusion held me back. Words have power, and I was afraid that whatever I said next could either fix things or break them beyond repair. I wondered if she felt the same fear. Did she see me as the owner of the house, or just a barrier standing in her way? Did she feel welcome here anymore, or had this place already become to her heart? The clock on the wall kept ticking, loud and impatient, reminding us that time was moving forward whether we were ready or not. Outside, life continued as usual. Neighbors passed by, unaware that inside this house, a family stood at a crossroads. My daughter-in-law's eyes flicked toward the door for a second, then back to me. That simple movement told me more than her words ever could. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no sound came out. There was so much I wanted to ask, and so much I was afraid to hear. The suitcases remained where they were, waiting. Waiting for permission, waiting for rejection, waiting for a decision that would change the meaning of this house forever. And just as she finally seemed ready to speak, the front door creaked open, and the sound of familiar footsteps echoed through the hallway. The footsteps grew louder, slow and familiar, until my son appeared in the doorway. He stopped the moment he saw the suitcases. For a second, none of us moved. His eyes shifted from the bags to his wife, then to me. I could see confusion cross his face, followed by something that looked like guilt. He didn't ask any questions right away. Instead, he loosened his tie and placed his office bag on the chair, as if this was just another ordinary evening. But nothing about this moment was ordinary. He cleared his throat and asked if everything was okay. His voice sounded steady, but I knew him well enough to hear the tension underneath. My daughter-in-law looked at him, silently, as if waiting for him to speak on her behalf. That look stirred something inside me. It told me that whatever decision had led to those suitcases was not made lightly, and not without struggle. I wondered how many conversations had already taken place between them, away from my ears, behind closed doors. I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. No one sat down. We stood there like strangers, each one unsure of where to place their emotions. The silence returned, heavier than before. I remembered the early days after their marriage, when my son used to sit beside me every evening and talk about his plans, his worries, his dreams. Slowly, those conversations became shorter, then rarer. I had told myself it was normal that a married man builds his own world. Standing there now, I realized how distant that world had become from mine. My daughter-in-law finally spoke, but her voice was low and careful. She said she didn't mean any disrespect. She said she just needed some time. Time. That word can mean many things. Time to think, time to heal, time to escape. I wanted to ask what had gone so wrong that time away from home felt like the only solution. But before I could say anything, my son raised his hand slightly, asking for a moment. He looked at me, then at his wife, and said we should talk calmly. He reminded us that this was still a family, and families talk things through. His words sounded reasonable, but there was a nervous edge to them. I noticed how he avoided looking directly at the suitcases, as if pretending they weren't there would make them disappear. I also noticed how my daughter-in-law stood a little closer to the door, as if she needed to be ready at any moment. Memories flooded my mind. I remembered how happy I had been when my son told me he wanted to marry her. I remembered welcoming her into this house, showing her where everything was, telling her she could treat this place as her own. I wondered when that promise had started to feel empty to her. Had I unknowingly crossed boundaries? Had my silence been mistaken for indifference, or my words for control? She spoke again, explaining that things had been difficult for a while. She didn't go into details, and maybe that was intentional. Sometimes what people don't say is more important than what they do. She mentioned feeling unheard, feeling like her presence didn't matter. Those words stung, even though they weren't aimed directly at me. I wanted to defend myself, to list all the ways I had tried to make her comfortable. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about keeping score. My son rubbed his forehead and sighed. He said work had been stressful, that he hadn't realized things were getting this serious. That sentence alone opened another wound. Not realized. How often do people fail to see what's happening right in front of them? I looked at him and saw not just my son, but a man torn between two worlds, unsure of how to hold them together without losing one. The room felt smaller with every passing minute. The walls that once felt warm and familiar now seemed to close in on us. I could hear the clock ticking again, each second reminding us that this moment could not be paused or undone. My daughter-in-law's eyes glistened, but she quickly looked away, unwilling to let tears fall in front of us. That restraint told me she had been strong for longer than anyone realized. I asked her where she planned to go. It was a simple question, but it carried a heavy weight. She hesitated before answering, then said she would stay with her sister for a while. Just until things settled, she said. But what does settled really mean in a situation like this? I glanced at my son, hoping he would say something that would bring clarity. Instead, he remained silent, lost in his own thoughts. I could feel a mix of emotions rising inside me. Fear of losing my family as I knew it. Regret over things left unsaid. Anger at the situation, not at the people. I realized then how fragile relationships can be, even when built on years of love and shared memories. One misunderstanding, one unspoken feeling, can create a distance that feels impossible to cross. The suitcases remained untouched. No one moved them closer to the door, and no one suggested unpacking them either. They stood there as a symbol of uncertainty, of a decision still hanging in the air. My daughter-in-law looked at them, then at me, as if waiting for my reaction. Did she expect me to stop her, or to step aside and let her go? I wasn't sure what she wanted, and I wasn't sure what I wanted either. I thought about the meaning of home. Was it a place you live in, or a place where you feel understood? Had this house stopped being a home for her long before the suitcases appeared? These questions echoed in my mind as the tension between us thickened. My son finally broke the silence, saying we would talk more after dinner. It was an attempt to delay the inevitable, to buy time. But time, as I was beginning to understand, doesn't always heal. Sometimes it only makes the waiting harder. As evening light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room, none of us moved. The door remained closed, but it felt like it could open at any moment. And in that uneasy pause, I realized that whatever happened next would change not just this day, but the future of our family in ways none of us were prepared for. Dinner was placed on the table, but no one felt hungry. The food sat there untouched, growing cold, just like the atmosphere between us. My son asked his wife to sit, but she only shook her head and said she wasn't in the mood. I could tell this wasn't about food at all. It was about everything that had been quietly breaking apart for months, maybe even years. I sat down slowly, trying to appear calm, though my hands trembled slightly as I folded them in my lap. As we sat there, memories kept replaying in my mind. Small moments I had once ignored now felt important. Times when she stayed quiet during family conversations. Moments when she chose to stay in her room instead of joining us. I had assumed she was just reserved by nature. Now I wondered if she had been feeling alone all along. The thought made my chest feel heavy. My son finally spoke, his voice low and careful. He said things had been difficult between them for a while. He admitted there were arguments, misunderstandings, and long silences that neither of them knew how to fill. Hearing this hurt more than I expected. I had always believed that love was enough to hold people together. But sitting there, watching them avoid each other's eyes, I realized love also needs effort, understanding, and time. My daughter-in-law listened quietly as he spoke. When he finished, she took a deep breath and said she had tried to talk to him many times. She said she had shared her feelings, her fears, her frustrations. But she felt like her words never truly reached him. She wasn't angry, she said. She was tired. Tired of repeating herself. Tired of waiting for things to change. That word again. Change. It hung in the air like a challenge. I noticed how my son's shoulders slumped as she spoke. He looked hurt but also defensive. He said he was under pressure, trying to manage work, responsibilities, and expectations from all sides. He said he never meant to make her feel ignored. Listening to them, I felt like I was watching two people speaking different languages, both sincere, both hurting, yet unable to meet in the middle. I wondered where I fit into all of this. Was I just an observer, or had I played a role without realizing it? My daughter-in-law glanced at me, then looked away quickly. That single glance made my heart sink. I sensed there were things she wanted to say to me, but didn't feel safe saying out loud. Maybe she felt judged. Maybe she felt watched. Or maybe she felt like this house was never truly hers, no matter how many times I told her otherwise. The topic of the house came up again. My son said living together had its challenges. He said everyone needed space, privacy, and freedom. I felt a sting at his words, though he didn't say anything directly against me. I had grown up believing that living together as a family made people stronger. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe what once felt like togetherness now felt like pressure to someone else. My daughter-in-law spoke softly, saying she didn't want to hurt anyone. She said she just needed to breathe, to think clearly without constant tension. She said leaving for a while wasn't running away, but protecting herself. I wanted to argue, to say families don't walk away when things get hard. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the tired look in her eyes, or maybe it was the realization that holding someone back doesn't always mean keeping them close. Outside, the sky darkened as evening settled in. The room felt even heavier under the dim light. My son suggested that maybe they could talk to someone, maybe take time together to fix things. His words sounded hopeful, but unsure. My daughter-in-law didn't respond right away. She looked at the floor, then at the door, then finally at the suitcases again. It was clear her mind was already somewhere else. I felt torn between my role as a mother and my role as an elder in the house. Part of me wanted to protect my son, to remind him of his responsibilities. Another part of me wanted to understand my daughter-in-law, to ease her pain. I realized how easy it is to judge when you don't know the full story, and how hard it is to stay silent when emotions are running high. The conversation drifted into silence again. The clock ticked loudly, marking each passing second. No decision was made. No apology was spoken. No promise was given. The tension remained, thick and unresolved. My daughter-in-law picked up her phone and checked the time, then slipped it back into her pocket. That small action felt like a countdown. I stood up slowly and said I needed some air. I stepped toward the window, looking out into the quiet street. From the outside, our house probably looked peaceful, like any other home at the end of the day. No one passing by would guess the storm brewing inside. I wondered how many families lived like this, carrying unspoken pain behind closed doors. When I turned back around, I saw my son and his wife standing apart, both lost in their own thoughts. The suitcases were still there, untouched, waiting for a choice, waiting for permission, waiting for someone to say the right words. I felt a deep sense of uncertainty settle in my heart. Whatever happened next, I knew nothing would be the same again. And as the night grew quieter, the question that had started it all echoed in my mind, unanswered and heavy with meaning. The night grew deeper, and with it, the weight in the room became almost unbearable. No one turned on the television. No one checked their phone again. It felt like we were all afraid that one small distraction might break whatever fragile balance was holding us together. My daughter-in-law stood near the suitcases, her hand resting lightly on one handle, not pulling it, not letting go either. That single gesture spoke louder than anything she had said all evening. My son finally moved closer to her. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough for me to sense his hesitation. He asked her quietly if she was really going to leave tonight. His voice cracked just a little, and I felt something twist inside my chest. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to decide whether he was seeing her for the first time or too late. She said she hadn't planned everything yet. She said she packed because she felt she had to be ready. Ready for what? She didn't say. Maybe ready for another argument. Maybe ready for disappointment. Or maybe ready to choose herself for once. My son nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a truth that scared him. He asked her if she still wanted to make things work. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. I held my breath without realizing it. That question could change everything. My daughter-in-law's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She said wanting something and knowing how to fix it are not the same. She said she was tired of feeling like the problem whenever she spoke up. Hearing that made me realize how many conversations might have happened when I wasn't around, how many nights she might have cried silently in this very house. The house felt different now. Every familiar sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a dog, the wind brushing against the windows, felt louder, sharper. I thought about the word permission again. Had I asked for permission to step into her life the way I had? Or had I assumed my role gave me the right to question her choices? That thought made my throat tighten.
My son turned to me then.
He asked me softly if I had known she was feeling this way. I shook my head. It was the truth, but it didn't feel like an excuse. He looked at me with a mix of sadness and frustration, not blaming, but searching. Searching for something solid to hold on to. I realized he was as lost as she was, just in a different way. He said maybe they needed space, but not distance. He suggested that they take time together, away from the house, away from everyone's expectations. For a brief moment, hope flickered. But my daughter-in-law didn't smile. She said space only helps if both people are willing to meet in the middle afterward. She said she wasn't sure anymore. That uncertainty cut deeper than anger ever could. I noticed how late it had gotten. The clock showed a time that felt unreal, as if the day should have ended hours ago. Yet here we were, still standing, still waiting. My daughter-in-law picked up one suitcase slightly, testing its weight, then placed it back down. The sound it made against the floor felt final, even though nothing had been decided. I wanted to speak, to tell her she mattered, that this house was still her home, if she wanted it to be. But I was afraid my words would sound empty now. Afraid they would come too late. Sometimes silence feels safer than saying the wrong thing, but it also feels like cowardice. I stood there, trapped between those two fears. My son ran his hand through his hair and took a deep breath. He said he didn't want her to go like this, with everything unresolved. He said they owed it to each other to talk honestly, without blame. His voice was steadier now, but his eyes betrayed him. He was afraid of losing her. Afraid that once she walked out with those suitcases, she might never walk back in the same way. She looked toward the door again, then at him. She said she needed one clear answer from him, something she had been asking for a long time. She didn't say what it was, but I could tell it was important. My son opened his mouth, then closed it. That hesitation felt louder than any argument we had had that night. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. This was no longer about suitcases or permission. It was about choices that could not be undone. About words that could either heal or destroy. About whether this family would find a way forward or quietly fall apart. The doorbell rang suddenly, sharp and unexpected, making all three of us flinch. We looked at each other in shock. No one was expecting anyone at this hour. The sound echoed through the house, cutting through the silence like a knife. My daughter-in-law tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. My son turned toward the door, his face pale. I stood frozen, staring at the door, my mind racing with possibilities. Whoever was on the other side was about to step into a moment already on the edge. And as the doorbell rang again, louder this time, I knew that whatever happened next would push us past the point of pretending everything was fine. The doorbell echoed through the house one more time, sharper and more urgent than before. My son hesitated, then slowly walked toward the door. With every step he took, I felt my heartbeat grow louder. My daughter-in-law stood frozen near the suitcases, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the door as if she already knew what was coming. When my son opened it, the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it a tension that felt heavier than anything we had faced so far. Standing at the doorway was her older brother. I recognized him instantly, though I had only met him once before at a family gathering. His expression was serious, almost tense, and his eyes moved quickly from my son to the suitcases behind him. He didn't greet anyone right away. Instead, he asked if his sister was ready. That single question sent a shock through the room. Ready. The word confirmed something I had been afraid to admit to myself, This visit was not a coincidence. My daughter-in-law stepped forward, her voice trembling as she asked how he knew to come now. He said she had called him earlier, telling him she might need help leaving tonight. Hearing that hurt more than I expected. It meant this moment had been planned, at least in part. It meant the suitcases weren't just a reaction to an argument, but a quiet decision forming long before the doorbell rang. I felt a wave of regret wash over me. How long had she been carrying this alone? My son looked stunned. He turned to his wife and asked why she hadn't told him. She called her brother. She looked down and said she didn't want another argument. She said she just wanted a safe way out if things became too overwhelming. Those words hit hard. Safe way out. They made it clear how trapped she must have felt, even in her own home. The brother stepped inside, careful and respectful, but firm. He said he wasn't there to cause trouble. He said he just wanted to make sure his sister was okay. His presence changed the balance in the room. Suddenly, this was no longer just a private family matter. Another perspective had entered, another set of eyes witnessing our broken silence. I felt exposed, as if all our hidden cracks were now on display. My son tried to explain, saying they were talking, that nothing had been decided yet. The brother listened, but didn't argue. He simply said that his sister had been unhappy for a long time, longer than anyone realized. He said she had been calling their mother in tears, unsure of what to do. That revelation felt like another door opening to a reality I had never seen. I wondered how many late-night phone calls, how many silent cries, had happened while we slept peacefully under the same roof. My daughter-in-law's shoulders shook slightly as she stood there, caught between her husband and her brother. I could see how torn she was. This wasn't about choosing one side over another. It was about survival, about finding space to breathe. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her she didn't have to leave like this. But the presence of her brother made me realize that trust had already been broken in ways words couldn't easily fix. The brother asked her again if she was ready. My son's eyes filled with desperation as he looked at her, silently begging for more time. He said they could talk more, that he would listen now, truly listen. His voice cracked as he spoke, and for a moment, it felt like everything might tip in a different direction. But my daughter-in-law didn't move toward him. She stayed where she was, her hand still on the suitcase handle, as if that was the only thing keeping her steady. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as I realized how close we were to losing her, not just from the house, but from our lives. I thought about all the moments we could have handled differently, all the chances to ask how she was really feeling instead of assuming everything was fine. The house that once felt full now seemed on the verge of emptiness. The brother reached down and picked up one of the suitcases, testing its weight just like she had earlier. The sound of the wheels rolling slightly across the floor felt like a countdown. My son stepped forward instinctively, then stopped, unsure if he had the right to intervene. No one spoke. The silence was louder than the doorbell had been. I stood there, torn between stopping her and letting her go. I knew that whatever happened next would leave a mark on all of us. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. And as my daughter-in-law finally lifted her eyes and opened her mouth to speak, I realized that her next words would decide whether this family would fracture beyond repair or face an even harder truth together. My daughter-in-law finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. She said she was tired of being silent, tired of carrying everything inside. She looked at my son and told him she loved him, but love alone was no longer enough to keep her feeling invisible. She said she needed honesty, not promises made out of fear. The room felt like it was holding its breath as she spoke, every word landing heavily on our hearts. My son took a step toward her, his eyes wet with emotion. He said he was sorry, not just for tonight, but for all the times he chose comfort over conversation. He admitted he had avoided hard talks because he was afraid of conflict, afraid of failing as a husband and a son. He said he never meant to make her feel alone, and hearing her pain finally made him realize how serious things had become. His apology didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded raw, almost desperate. She listened without interrupting him. When he finished, she nodded slowly and said she believed he was sincere. She said she didn't want to break the family, and she never wanted to hurt anyone. She just wanted to feel like an equal partner, not a guest who had to constantly prove her place in the house. Then she turned to me, and for the first time that night, she looked me directly in the eyes. She said she respected me and understood my attachment to the house. But she said something that caught me completely off guard. She reminded us that when my son and she got married, they had invested their savings together to renovate this home. She said her name was also on the documents, something we had never openly discussed as a family. The word owner suddenly took on a different meaning. The question I had asked earlier echoed back to me, heavier than ever. Permission goes both ways, she said softly. The room fell silent. I felt my face grow warm, not from anger, but from realization. In that moment, I understood how my words must have sounded to her. I had spoken from a place of habit, not intention. I slowly nodded, feeling the weight of my mistake. I told her she was right, and that the house was as much hers as anyone's. Saying those words out loud felt difficult, but also freeing. My son looked between us, stunned, as if seeing the situation clearly for the first time. The tension that had filled the room all evening began to shift, not disappearing, but changing shape. The brother, who had been standing quietly until then, finally relaxed his grip on the suitcase. He placed it gently back on the floor and said he was glad they were finally talking honestly. For a brief moment, it felt like everything might settle right there. My son asked his wife to stay, at least for the night. He promised they would seek help, talk openly, and rebuild what had been damaged. I added that I would step back where needed and listen more instead of assuming. The house felt warmer suddenly, like it was breathing again. But just as hope began to settle in, my daughter-in-law surprised us all. She said she appreciated the honesty and the apologies, but she still needed time away. Not because she didn't care, but because she needed space to heal and think without pressure. She said staying now, even with good intentions, would only bury the pain deeper. She promised she wasn't leaving forever, but she couldn't stay tonight. My son's face fell, but he nodded. This time, he didn't try to stop her. He said he would respect her choice and wait, no matter how hard it was. I felt tears sting my eyes as I realized that sometimes love means letting go, even when every part of you wants to hold on. The brother picked up the suitcases again, and this time, no one stopped him. My daughter-in-law paused at the door and turned back. She looked at all of us and said this house would always matter to her, but peace mattered more right now. Then she stepped outside into the night. As the door closed behind her, the house fell silent once more. But this silence was different. It wasn't full of anger or confusion. It was full of unanswered questions and fragile hope. I stood there, staring at the door, knowing that the real test for our family was only beginning, and that when she returned, everything would have to be different. The house felt strangely quiet after the door closed behind her. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound, every thought. My son stood still for a long moment, staring at the door as if expecting it to open again. When it didn't, he slowly sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. I had never seen him like that before. Not as a child, not as a grown man. It was the look of someone realizing that love is fragile and must be protected every single day. I sat beside him, unsure of what to say. Words felt small compared to what had just happened. After a while, he looked up at me and asked if he had failed. I told him failure isn't falling apart. Failure is refusing to learn. That night, we talked longer than we had in years. He spoke honestly about his fears, his confusion, and how torn he had felt trying to balance being a husband and a son. I listened, truly listened, without interrupting, without defending myself. The next few days were difficult. The house felt empty in ways I couldn't explain. Her cup still sat on the kitchen shelf. Her slippers were by the door. Small reminders of her presence were everywhere. I realized how much she had quietly become part of this home, even when she felt like she didn't belong. My son tried calling her, but he didn't push when she said she needed time. That restraint, I could tell, was hard for him, but it was necessary. Her brother checked in once, letting us know she was safe. He didn't sound angry. If anything, he sounded relieved. That call eased some of my worry. I began to reflect deeply on my own role in everything that had happened. I thought about the question I had asked that started it all. Did you ask the owner of the house for permission? I understood now how that sentence carried years of unspoken power and expectation. I promised myself I would never use words like that again without thinking. Weeks passed, slowly and painfully. My son started coming home earlier from work. He cooked meals, cleaned the house, and sat quietly in the evenings, sometimes just staring out the window. One evening, he told me he had booked counseling sessions for himself, not just for the marriage, but to understand himself better. Hearing that gave me hope. Change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in quiet decisions like that. Then one afternoon, she called me. I wasn't expecting it, and for a moment, I didn't know whether to answer. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. Her voice was soft, cautious, but respectful. She said she wanted to talk, not to argue, but to clear the air between us. We met at a small cafe, neutral ground, just the two of us. No suitcases. No raised voices. She spoke openly about how she had felt living in the house, how small moments had built into heavy emotions. I listened without interrupting, even when it hurt to hear. When it was my turn, I apologized. Not vaguely, not defensively, but honestly. I told her I never meant to make her feel like a guest in her own home. I admitted that I had clung too tightly to old ideas without realizing how times and relationships had changed. Tears fell on both sides, but they felt healing, not bitter. When my son and she finally met again, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No dramatic promises. Just two people sitting across from each other, speaking carefully, honestly. They agreed to take things slow. They decided not to rush back into old patterns. Eventually, they chose to move into a small place of their own nearby. Not as an escape, but as a fresh start. Helping them pack felt different this time. There was laughter mixed with emotion. No tension. No fear. When she hugged me before leaving, she whispered thank you. I realized then that families don't stay together because of walls or ownership. They stay together because of respect, communication, and the willingness to grow. The house is quieter now, but it doesn't feel broken. It feels wiser. My son visits often, and so does she. We talk more openly than we ever did before. We ask questions instead of making assumptions. We listen instead of judging. That one question I asked on that difficult day changed everything. It forced all of us to face truths we had been avoiding. It reminded me that being the elder in a family doesn't mean being the authority over emotions. It means being the first to understand, the first to soften, and sometimes the first to apologize. Looking back, I'm grateful for the pain because it led us to honesty. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. A house becomes a home not by who owns it, but by how safe everyone feels inside it.